Hey, Pretty Girl Club. So today I'm going to talk about how privilege can't actually be measured. The reason that a lot of people have a hard time discussing pretty privilege or they have a hard time pinpointing privilege, it's because you cannot definitively measure it. And the reason you can't measure it is because all privileges are really based on social constructs. So if you think about light skin privilege, that's based on a social construct, which is race. Not to mention the fact that light skin and dark skin are both subjective. Skin tone is subjective. When you think about pretty privilege, beauty is very subjective. One person might think that one type of beauty is the prettiest, and then somebody else may think that something different is pretty. And so the only people who get upset about me talking about privilege are people who, number one, they don't understand the definitions of words, or number two, they have no knowledge of sociology or psychology. I know that I've tried to give you guys kind of some ideas on how you can pinpoint when you have privilege because, for example, I've noticed when it comes to the light skin privilege talking point, whenever you ask a woman to name examples of light skin privilege, she actually starts naming examples of pretty privilege. For example, receiving likes on social media, getting asked on a date, being the popular girl in high school, getting asked to prom, all of those things, those don't actually have anything to do with color or skin tone because dark-skinned black women can be asked to prom. They can receive likes on social media apps. They can receive compliments. And so one thing I've noticed is that when it comes to people getting offended easily by the word privilege, it's because they don't understand their own privileges. They don't view themselves as privileged. They actually have a terminology called underprivileged, which means that you're literally beneath others. The word under, it means literally beneath. You are beneath someone. So anyone who identifies as underprivileged, or AKA they identify as being underneath others socially, they're going to have a problem with the type of content that we create over on this side of YouTube. But the thing to remember about privilege is you cannot measure it. And so there's really no point in looking at somebody else's privilege versus looking at your own. But let me talk about that for a second because jealousy is usually based on privilege. It's usually based on some sort of social privilege. It could be economic privilege. And so if you don't have a certain privilege, you only have two options. Either option number one, change yourself to attain that privilege, or option number two, accept the fact that you will never, ever have that particular privilege and learn to work with your other privileges instead. So I've noticed that, by the way, there's no wrong answer. I have some very controversial views. I am all for women if you need to change yourself to attain a certain privilege. So for example, when I became out of shape, I no longer had thin privilege. I know that in the black community, they consider like a size 12 to still be pretty thin, but in my upbringing, that is considered fat and overweight. And so I didn't like the way that I looked. I didn't like the way that I felt. I didn't like my energy level, and I didn't feel like I had thin privilege. And I noticed at the time when I was out of shape and I didn't feel leveled up, and by the way, let's think about that phrase, level up. Leveling up to what? Level up to having a certain privilege that you didn't have before. But when I think about my body type when I was out of shape, I actually struggled more with being jealous or insecure when it came to body types. So your jealousy is actually supposed to be used as a tool. Jealousy is your brain telling you that, hey, I want this. So anyone who is actually mature and anyone who knows how to level up, she would know how to alchemize jealousy so that she can succeed. So what I noticed was when I was out of shape, I struggled with more jealousy sometimes if somebody had a really nice body. And so that actually helped me to realize, wait a minute, just because the black community thinks that a size 10 or size 12 is not fat, I feel fat and I don't I don't feel as quote unquote privileged as I want to feel in terms of my body. And so I am going to change myself to attain that privilege. I am all for changing whatever you feel you need to change because guess what? It's your life at the end of the day. So you get to decide which privileges are the most important to you. So for me personally, I realized via my own jealousy, I realized that being very thin was my form, that was very important to me. It was my idea of what privilege means. And so I decided to change myself. I went and worked out. Even though all my friends and family were saying, but you're tall, you still have a small waist, you still have an hourglass shape, you just have a booty, there's nothing wrong with it. If I don't feel privileged in my psyche, then there's no point in having that thing. And so the privileges you have are nobody's business, number one. First of all, Any privileges you have in life, that is none of their business. You're not required to explain yourself. You're not required to feel guilty for how you were born. So, for example, there are plenty of people who talk crap about capitalism, but then they are still starting businesses. They are still wanting to go to college so they can get better jobs. So they'll talk all this shit about how, oh, our economy is so messed up. Meanwhile, they're trying to benefit from capitalism. And so the thing to remember is that all privileges are based on isms. Is that bad? Of course it's bad. Everything is bad in our society. I mean, seriously, damn near everything in our society is bad, okay? So why play fair in an unfair world? I don't have to be at the bottom so that I can prove to random strangers that I'm a good person. Because the last time I checked, being the nicest person to everybody 24/7 and having no boundaries, that didn't get me anywhere. And so the only people who guilt you for privilege are people who are jealous of that privilege or they wish they could have that privilege. The same people who guilt you for being pretty, for being rich, for having a healthy relationship, for having a two-parent home, going to a good school, going to an Ivy League college. The only people who guilt you for those privileges are people who wish they had those privileges themselves. And like I said, privilege is actually subjective. So, for example, with the whole two-parent home thing, a lot of people think it's a privilege to have grown up in a two-parent home. I don't necessarily think it's always a privilege because it depends on who your parents are. You could have a two-parent home and then maybe your parents are unhealthy. But for some people, they are actually jealous of the fact that you grew up in a two-parent home. I've seen women online complaining. They'll say, oh, this man, he didn't raise my kids, but then when he had kids with this other woman, he raised their kids. Anybody who says stuff like that, generally speaking, they're saying it because they wanted the privilege of their child being raised in a two-parent home. So always pay attention to the insults that people give you, because the type of insult that a person gives you, it will show you what they consider privileged. It will show you what they look down upon. So for example, when it comes to light skin privilege, remember what happened with E. Kane? People said, oh, E. Kane, your light skin privilege didn't work because you still got beat up by your black boyfriend. Okay, so she just revealed that she views light skin privilege as being treated better by black men. So always listen to the person's insults, always listen to their rebuttals, and then all you have to do is reverse engineer their rebuttal, and then you'll be able to figure out, okay, wait a minute, so she thinks that this type of privilege should lead to being treated well by black men. So she views that as a privilege. The male gaze is a privilege to her. Being treated well by black men, that's a privilege to her. Being in a hypergamous marriage is another common privilege that a lot of women believe in, or that a lot of women seek after. By the way, in my opinion, there is no right or wrong form of privilege. That is up to you. That's up to your personal morals and stuff like that. So I'm going to list a couple of examples of privileges, and then I want you to start thinking, okay, what kinds of privileges are important to me? So let's start off with the easiest, most attainable, and most common privilege, in my opinion, which is pretty privilege. This is a very commonly talked about thing on social media. It's very trendy, and I also feel like pretty privilege is easily attainable because there are so many different types of beauty. There are multi-billion-dollar industries where you can literally go to a convenience store and purchase some basic makeup or something, and then you have increased your quote-unquote pretty privilege right there. But let's talk about the different types of pretty privilege. You could have pretty privilege in terms of you have a pretty face. So that's pretty face privilege. You have pretty hair. Maybe your hair is long and healthy, regardless of texture. But for some people, they actually do associate certain hair textures with pretty privilege. Like, oh, straight hair is pretty, curly hair is pretty, brown hair is pretty, red hair is pretty. So you could actually pick and choose, okay, which type of pretty privilege do I want? So that's another one. Hair, pretty hair privilege, pretty teeth. Having straight, beautiful white teeth, that's a big deal in our society. People are literally wasting tens of thousands of dollars on veneer techs just so they can get a chance to have those pretty teeth. So having pretty teeth, that's also a privilege. There are also certain features that a lot of people may associate with beauty, such as maybe having dimples, having high cheekbones, having a beautiful eye shape or something like that, having long eyelashes, something as simple as your eyelashes. People consider eyelashes, long eyelashes, to be pretty, to the point where women are spending hundreds of dollars getting a caterpillar glued to the tops of their eyelids so that they can appear to have long eyelashes. So even when it comes to pretty privilege in and of itself, you can actually break it down into categories. For example, when it comes to hair privilege, like pretty hair privilege, one of the biggest things that I pay attention to on other people's hair is their edges. If you have long hair all the way down to your tailbone and you have no edges, I'm not going to consider your hair to be pretty, because your hairline, that's very important. That's what frames your face, or at least to me, my hairline is what frames my face. And so I love having kind of my natural baby hairs with no gel on them, just kind of naturally kind of flowing off of the top of my forehead. I enjoy that form of pretty hair privilege. Another type of pretty privilege is pretty body privilege, having a nice athletic body, or maybe you associate having a certain shape with being pretty. In my opinion, my internalized beauty standard is I like hourglass shapes or Coke bottle shapes. I like to be tall and slender. I like my waist and my stomach to be flat. I want my back to be flat, no love handles or anything, no lumps and stuff, no bra strap fat. I want to be able to wear a backless halter top and my back is smooth and everything. That is my beauty standard. And by the way, another thing I've noticed about ignorant people is that if someone is ignorant about psychology, they will try to project their internalized beauty standard onto you. So, for example, if your internalized beauty standard is, I like a woman that is a multiracial black woman, she has a golden skin tone, maybe she has long curly hair, maybe that's your internalized beauty standard. People who look different than that will actually get mad because they feel entitled to meeting your beauty standard. They feel like you owe them a compliment. So that's actually, not only is that entitlement, usually entitlement comes from inferiority complexes, but never fall for that. That's actually just a psychological gaslighting tactic. Some people want you to pity them and they want to receive pity compliments from you. And so they'll try to guilt you and say, why don't you give short guys a chance? Why don't you give broke men a chance? Oh, you're like on the pop the balloon thing. A lot of guys were complaining when short girls were rejecting short guys. But it's like, no, we don't owe you sex. We don't owe you compliments. We don't owe you special attention in order to prove that we do not discriminate against short men. So guess what? Unfortunately, the same is true even on the opposite end. The same is true for women. So it's actually not colorist, texturist, or featurist for someone to have an internalized beauty standard or a quote unquote type that is different than yourself. So that's something else to remember. And I know that that's very triggering, but you ladies on this channel, you guys are very realistic and very logical. And so you understand that not every guy in the entire world is going to find you to be drop dead gorgeous. And that's totally normal. But I've noticed that women with inferiority complexes, they will try to measure their beauty against yours or measure their pretty privilege against yours. And you really can't measure it because different people find different things to be pretty. And so another thing that I've noticed is that if you find yourself to be pretty, other girls will try to say, well, you're not pretty. Or guys will say, but you're a 6, you're average at best, you're mid. And it's like, well, that's just your opinion. My beauty standard doesn't revolve around your opinion. So you can say I'm mid all you want, but when I look in the mirror, I see beauty. When I go out into the world, I feel beautiful. When it comes to how I'm treated, I am treated as beautiful. And that's another thing, by the way, social status, the way that you're treated. Anytime someone uses the word pedestal or being pedestalized or being worshipped or put on a pedestal, what they really mean is human beings are nice to you. That's all that means. It's literally just a fancy intellectualized word in order to describe how others treat you. So pedestalized, if you ask somebody to describe what does that mean, give me an example of someone being pedestalized. Oh, my sister got complimented more than me. She got called pretty by mom and dad. Mom and dad used to buy her makeup that matches her skin tone because they thought that she was pretty. Mom and dad put her in pageants or they put her in cheerleading because she was pretty. Okay, so now you've just revealed that your definition of the word pedestal means you're simply being treated nicely. People are opening the doors of opportunity to you. People are going out of their way to help you. So all that means is that you want that social status. And by the way, there's no wrong answer to any of this. You are in charge of your own life. So you get to decide, hey, what types of privileges do I want? How do I want to be treated? Okay, do I want to be treated nicer? How do I want to be treated at the grocery store? How do I want to be treated at school? How do I want to be treated by my friends and family? Another thing that I've noticed is whenever somebody says go where you're celebrated, what they mean is go where you're pedestalized. Okay, pedestalization is celebration. And if you don't believe me, I have no problem pulling up the words pedestal as well as pulling up dozens of synonyms so that you understand what pedestals are. A pedestal or being celebrated, all that means is you're treated special. And being treated special means that you are receiving compliments. And so the thing that you get to ask yourself is, okay, how important is it to me to receive compliments? Like, I know for me personally, I do enjoy receiving compliments. Hell yeah, I eat that shit up. I have no shame in saying it because I'm being honest with myself. So I'd rather be honest with myself than lie to myself and say, well, I don't care if anybody ever compliments me the rest of my life. Well, no. I mean, I would hope that you would want to be around friends or family members or a significant other who encourages you. By the way, if you look up the definition of that word encouraging, if you look up that definition of the word encouraging, that means to cheer someone up, to uplift them, to inspire them. And it's interesting how that word uplift is in there. You know what uplift is also a synonym for? It's another synonym for pedestal. If you think about an actual pedestal, it's an uplifted, it's a platform. It's uplifting that person. You're putting them on a platform, putting them on a pedestal. So I just revealed right here by simply using the dictionary that being pedestalized really just means being encouraged. Even if you look at the example that I just gave of the two sisters, maybe one sister, the parents put her in cheerleading, they put her in pageants. Well, anytime a parent puts a child in a special activity, they are encouraging that child. That's a form of encouragement. You're uplifting that child. You're encouraging that child to try out for the soccer team. You're showing that child that you believe in her. So a lot of this privilege discourse, a lot of the conversations around desirability politics, who has privilege, who doesn't have privilege. First of all, if you're alive, that's a privilege. So I can make the argument that everybody on this earth technically has a privilege. Number one, they're alive. Number two, a lot of people are able-bodied. That's a privilege that a lot of people overlook. But I want you to examine your mindset around privilege because the people who have a bad relationship with that word or they have like cognitive dissonance around privilege, they will never be able to fully tap into their privilege, of course, because they think it's bad. And we've already established that everything is bad in society. I mean, seriously, name one thing that has never caused any harm to anybody whatsoever. I mean, seriously, if you think about religion, there are plenty of religions that have fought in wars and stuff like that. If you think about marriage, there are still bad marriages out there. If you think about starting a business, the whole premise of starting a business and capitalism, it literally means that you rip off one party because you purchase a t-shirt for $2 and then you resell that t-shirt to somebody else for $20. That is inherently bad. So we've already established that all of this stuff is bad, okay? So if you want to live in a fake reality where you pretend like everything is awesome and everything is good, then this is not the channel for you. So we're not going to sit over here and try to be doormats so that we can prove that like we're so holy and high and mighty. But I've noticed that the women who have good girl syndrome, those are the women who tend to be treated like doormats because they have a bad mindset around privilege. And so they're scared of their own beauty, you know, they're scared of their own things that they have going for them, and they're not willing to utilize or soak up whatever opportunities they have because they're afraid of what other people think of them, which is actually a disadvantage. So on this channel, I talk a lot about privilege stacking. I've noticed that some women, they're not privilege stacking, they're actually trauma stacking. So instead of stacking positive memories and stuff, they're stacking negative experiences and negative memories. And it's like, how are you going to win the game if you never even play? And so the first thing that I like to do is I like to ask myself, what privileges are the most important to me? I thought about this. It took me around 27 years to actually realize that I do have about a top 4 of what my privileges are, where it's like, if I don't have these privileges, I'm going to be sad or I'm going to like try to pursue it again. And I'm just being 100% honest. So I noticed for me, it is having beauty, having influence, having financial success, and having healthy relationships. I've noticed that those are kind of like the 4 most important privileges that I want to have in life. And when I say healthy relationships, I'm actually not talking about romantic relationships, although that can be a part of it if you want it to be. But for me, the reason why I mention healthy relationships is because I don't like being around toxic friends. I've noticed that if I'm around toxic friends, toxic family members, if I'm at a toxic job, that actually is a depression trigger for me. So your depression triggers will actually tell you that you really want the exact opposite of that thing. So if being ugly is a depression trigger for you, or if feeling ugly is a depression trigger, I'm not going to shame you because there's nothing to be ashamed of. That means that pretty privilege is extremely important to you, and that is totally okay. You have every right to be as beautiful as you want to be. You have every right to have healthy friendships and to get away from toxic people. So I've noticed that I was able to pinpoint what my most important privileges were based on what my depression triggers are. So think about the things that have triggered your depression in the past. Is it unhealthy relationships with friends, family, romantic partners? Is it being ugly or being perceived as ugly, being treated as ugly, feeling ugly? Even if others don't treat you bad, just kind of feeling ugly on the inside. I've noticed for me, those two things. Is it being invisible, not having a voice, people not listening to you? I notice that's one for me. If I feel unheard, if I feel like I'm a doormat, if I feel like people are constantly overlooking me, they're not listening to what I have to say, that's actually a depression trigger for me. And then same thing with poverty. Poverty is a depression trigger for me as well. If I can't eat, I don't have enough money to pay my bills. I'm stressed out trying to figure out how am I going to make rent. So those 4 depression triggers that I just mentioned, I just revealed what my personal top 4 privileges are that I want to make sure that I always have. And so another thing to remember about privilege is somebody's always going to be talking shit about whatever privilege you have. Doesn't matter. If you're rich, people are going to talk shit. If you're pretty, people will talk shit. If you're skinny, people will talk shit. So it's like people are going to talk shit whether I have privileges or not. So I might as well just try to live the life that I want to live instead of being depressed and I've got people kicking me while I'm down. I don't want that to be my story. And so, in order to actually start stacking your own personal privileges, you have to first admit to yourself, hey, I actually do care about being pretty. It's so funny because when I was married at one point, I didn't think that I cared about being pretty because I was like, oh, I'm married now. I didn't realize at the time that I was being male centered, but I was like, oh, I'm married now, so it's not as big of a deal anymore. And so once I started to kind of let myself go, for lack of better words, I actually still became sad and became depressed because then I realized, wait a minute, it wasn't about being pretty just so I could have a man or so I can have a marriage or something. For me, it was about being pretty so that I can vibrate on the frequency of a pretty woman. I know I'm using some strange spiritual terms, but I don't know how else to describe it. When I feel beautiful, like if my lashes are beautiful, my hair is beautiful, my makeup's done, I have a gorgeous outfit on, I have beautiful high heels, I like the person I am when I feel beautiful, whether I have a man or not. And so that was actually a life-changing realization for me. It was when I realized, wait a minute, being beautiful or like having beauty hobbies, that's actually a form of self-love because I consider it to be a form of self-care. So I know for other women it may be different and that's okay. There is no wrong answer. But for me personally, when I do my little lashes and stuff, that's just me practicing my own self-care. So I know that guys aren't going to notice. I just got my lashes done. My boyfriend, he didn't even really notice. When I do my hair in a different way, or I have a little bit of purple eyeliner on, those are things that other people don't even notice. And so that actually helped me to realize, wait a minute, this whole time, it turns out that pretty privilege or feeling beautiful within, that was something that I've always wanted just in general. Doesn't matter if other people really notice it or not. I do believe in the concept of micro validation or compliments. But remember, compliments are supposed to complement the self-esteem that's already there. And so for me, I've noticed my most important privileges for myself are pretty privilege, influential privilege, meaning I can speak out about my beliefs. I can stand up for myself. I have a voice. Financial privilege. And when I say financial privilege, I really just mean financial stability. I don't have to be a multi-billionaire, but I do need to at least meet a threshold of financial stability and also having healthy relationships, meaning that I don't have toxic friends, snake ass friends or friends that don't celebrate me. This is another thing about friendships as well. I know what type of friend I am. I'm the type of friend that puts my friends on a pedestal. And when I say that, I'm not saying, oh, they're on a pedestal above me, because remember the term pedestal, it really just means you're uplifting them. So I know that I'm the type of friend where I uplift my friends. I'm very encouraging. almost every single one of my friends has told me that whenever I'm around that they feel very uplifted, they feel very like hyped up, they feel excited, they feel celebrated. I'm the type of person where I notice the best qualities in my friend. So even if my friend is fat, she's broke, she's going through all this bad stuff, I will pinpoint one positive thing about her and I will remind her of that positive thing because that's the type of friend that I am. And so one thing I've noticed when it comes to having relationship privilege is that I want to be surrounded by women who treat me like that. I don't want women who are constantly nitpicking my flaws. Oh, your hair's messed up. Your makeup's messed up. Your lipstick is messed up. I don't want friends that are constantly pinpointing my flaws or family members who they always try to take me down a notch or something like, oh, you got promoted? Well, so and so other person, they started their own business. They're a millionaire. No, I don't want people who like compare me negatively to others or people who treat me like I'm just basic and average because I don't treat my friends and family like they're just basic and average. And so I like reciprocation in my friendships. And I've noticed that that is a form of having a relationship privilege. I want every single one of my relationships, every single person in my life should be a source of positive micro validation. When I say micro validation, it just means they say encouraging things to me. No, it doesn't mean like they have to walk on eggshells, but I also don't want to be around friends who are nitpicking me or friends who kind of ignore me, they exclude me, they don't care if I'm there or not there. I don't like that sort of vibe. And so, some examples of privilege can be things like social status and connections. Maybe you have a lot of rich friends, a lot of famous friends. Another form of privilege that may be important to some of you guys is where you live. That's actually in my top 5 as well, my geographical location. I very much want to live in a privileged geographical location. So, what that means to me is I need to live right in the middle of the city. So, no matter what city I live in, I need to live downtown. I need to live in the nice part of the center of the city. So the nice part of downtown, right by the beach or right by, I need to live in the most beautiful part of the city. That's very important to me. And I'm one of those people who's willing to work multiple jobs if necessary so that I can afford to live in a geographically privileged location. So when it comes to building privilege based on your geographical location, you can ask yourself a few questions. So for example, for me, I chose where I wanted to live based on the environment. So do I want to live around a lot of black people, a lot of white people, a multicultural environment, a multiracial environment with everyone? Do I want to live in a luxury type of apartment? Do I want to live in a house? Do I like the suburbs? Do I like the city? All of those are questions that I asked myself. So I know that I am a city girl at heart. Yes, I love living in a big city. I love being able to walk out of my building and, there's a bodega right there. There's like a park not far. There, I like that sort of vibe. And so that's what location privilege means to me. And this is why I say privilege can't be measured because everybody has their own definition of what privilege is to them. Everybody has their own list of privilege priorities. So, for example, people who have children, they're going to probably prioritize their children, or at least I would hope they would prioritize their children's privilege as well. So that's why I say it can't be measured because everybody has their own standard of what they perceive as being privileged. One of the critiques that I got of this channel was I shouldn't use Ice Spice on this channel because, she's a rapper that like curses and, she's like half naked in her music videos. Okay, but that tells me that that person who said that, her idea of privileged is probably a conservative version. So maybe she wants to be the type where she wears suits and she is very covered up and she does not wear long nails. And maybe she's somebody's wife or she's one of those kind of hypergamous wife types. And that's totally fine. But that was her definition of privilege. To Ice Spice has said she wanted to be a rapper. So that means that, if you want to be a rapper and you want to be a musician, or if you want to be like Nicki Minaj or whoever, for some women, they genuinely do want that. They want to be rapping on music videos or wearing bikinis and having fun, and getting paid millions of dollars just to dance and twerk and whatever. So that's why I say that privilege really can't be measured because everybody has their own internalized standard of privilege. So just like how I said a standard of beauty, everyone has their own internalized standard of privilege. And so it's actually, number one, it's really none of your business what somebody else's internalized privilege standard is. But even if you were to ask someone, what types of privileges do you care about the most? Number one, I really don't believe that most people are even self aware to even know what they want. But number two, everybody's going to give you a different answer. If you ask 10 people what their definition of success is, you're going to get 10 different answers. For some women, it's their dream to win a Grammy. It's their dream to perform at BET Awards or to do their raps or to rap about farts. I don't know. Or to be this funny kind of parody rapper like Ice Spice. Or they get to wear these big chains and all that. For some people, that really is their dream. So I try to do my best to keep an open mind. And I like to think to myself, like, hey, that's her definition of privilege, and that's okay. She's a different person than me. She lives a different lifestyle than me. She wants to go down a different path, and that's fine. That's why I say that privilege can't be measured, because a lot of people who make comments like, oh, her pretty privilege didn't get her anywhere. Her pretty privilege couldn't save her. Her light skin couldn't save her, whatever. People who make those types of comments, they actually don't know what that person's standards were for privilege. So anytime a person insults you, remember, they are revealing what their privilege standards are. So if they say, oh, you didn't reach the heights, Kane, because you're getting your ass beat by this black guy. Okay, so they're telling you that their standard of privilege is to have money and to be pedestalized by a man. It's to be treated well by a man. And I'm not shaming it. I'm just telling you that you can actually psychoanalyze a person's insults against you. And then you can actually determine in your mind, oh, okay, that means that they think this is a privilege and not that. But yeah, privilege can't be measured. And also, what privileges are most important to you? Let me know in the comment section, and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.